I called Will and said, could you come to my house, have a dinner? I want to talk about this movie.
The two biggest black dudes on television, if we come together and we make a movie together.
That sounds good. I said, let me read the script.
Martin Lawrence once stood in front of a live television audience and ended an engagement without telling his fiancée first. While she was busy planning their wedding, he was already gone. Over the next 3 decades, Martin would find love again and again, 3 separate women who got to hear him explain himself. But she never got that chance. So why did he end that relationship in the first place? And why, 3 decades and 3 marriages later, is she still the one he's never spoken of again? Join us as we uncover the one woman Martin Lawrence has never truly let go of. The fairy tale that ended on live TV. In 1993, Martin Lawrence was one of the biggest names on television, and Lark Voorhees was the girl half of America grew up watching on Saved by the Bell, a role that had already earned her 6 Young Artist Award nominations and 2 wins before she turned 20. She had recently come out of a 3-year relationship with her Saved by the Bell co-star, Mark-Paul Gosselaar, a romance that had run alongside the entire life of that show before quietly ending in 1992. When her path crossed with Martin's, on the set of his own sitcom Martin, where she appeared as a guest star that same year, the chemistry was instant and it spilled off the screen. Within months they were a couple, and within the year engaged. For a moment, it looked like Hollywood's version of a fairy tale, 2 rising stars from opposite corners of pop culture. Lark believed it was real. She spent that year the way any bride-to-be would, picking out details, imagining a future, trusting that the man beside her was building the same picture. She had no reason to think otherwise. Martin had proposed and the plans were already moving. Then, on February 22, 1994, without any warning to her at all, Martin sat down across from Arsenio Hall on The Arsenio Hall Show and told the host he was single and looking for a good woman elsewhere. Lark did not hear it from Martin first. She heard it the way the rest of the country did, live, in real time, with cameras rolling. The engagement was over before she even had the chance to ask why. Most people find out over the phone or across a kitchen table. Martin found a slightly larger audience. The woman Martin referenced that night on the show was never named publicly, and despite the announcement, no marriage to anyone else followed within the year. It would be more than a year before he was seriously linked to anyone new. Tabloids chased the story for weeks. Lark, still young and still processing a very public heartbreak, retreated from the spotlight that had once made her one of the most talked about young actresses in the country. Martin, for his part, moved on quickly, both publicly and privately, and rarely spoke about what happened between them in detail. Lark, meanwhile, continued acting, landing a recurring role on Days of Our Lives in 1996. Lark herself has spoken about that period of her life only in passing, describing it as difficult without going much further. 2 years after the breakup, in 1996, Lark married Miguel Coleman. That marriage lasted until 2004. When it ended in divorce, she found love again and got married to Jimmy Green in 2015. That marriage only lasted a few months. Martin, meanwhile, was already moving toward the altar again, this time with a former beauty queen from Virginia. The pattern. Patricia Southall was a former Miss Virginia, USA, when she married Martin in 1995. In a ceremony that seemed to promise the stability the Voorhees engagement never got the chance to reach. The couple welcomed a daughter, Jasmine, together the following year, but the marriage did not hold. By September 1996, Martin had filed for divorce, and the split that followed was messy enough that Patricia later voiced concerns for her own safety during the proceedings. She sought a temporary restraining order during that stretch, citing those concerns directly, though both she and Martin would describe the split in far calmer terms in interviews given years later. The divorce was finalized in 1997. Martin later admitted, in an interview given shortly after, that the ordeal had left him doubting he would ever marry again. He wasn't wrong exactly, just early. It took him 15 years to prove himself wrong. Patricia moved on in 2000, marrying NFL Hall of Famer Emmitt Smith. Martin did marry again, but it took him a long time to get there. The same year his divorce from Patricia was finalized, Martin began a relationship with Shamika Gibbs, a television personality who would become the longest romantic relationship of his life. For 15 years, the two built a life together without ever making it official, raising two daughters, Iana and Amara, along the way. Iana was born in 2001 and Amara in 2005, meaning both girls were already years old by the time their parents finally made things legally official. On July 10, 2010, at his Beverly Hills home, Martin finally married her, in a ceremony attended by around 120 guests, including Eddie Murphy and Denzel Washington. 2 years later, in April 2012, Martin filed for divorce, and the marriage ended the way most divorces don't, mutually, without a headline fight, both sides calling it amicable. Shamika went on to join the reality show Hollywood Exes the following year, where she also opened up publicly about health, battles with lupus and celiac disease, before eventually remarrying a man named Antoine Hill. Then came Roberta Moradfar, an aesthetics nurse practitioner. Roberta had been by Martin's side since at least 2014, first appearing with him publicly at the Teddy Bear Ball that year, and continuing to show up at his side at events for years before anything was made official. In the spring of 2017, Martin proposed with a custom 5-carat emerald-cut ring, designed over months with Beverly Hills jeweler iconic jewels and engraved with both of their initials. Roberta shared the moment with the world, certain that this, finally, was the one that would reach the altar. It wasn't. She was still by his side 3 years later, appearing alongside his 3 daughters at the 2020 premiere of Bad Boys for Life. But 6 years after the proposal, in December 2022, no wedding had ever happened, and Roberta revealed a new relationship of her own online. The ring had spent longer in a jewelry box than anywhere near an altar, and it ended the way the other two had, quietly, privately, with both sides free to just move on. That's the pattern underneath the pattern. Patricia, Shamika, Roberta, 3 relationships, 3 endings, and in every one of them Martin got to choose how and when it ended. Only one engagement in his life ended without his say in the timing. In Martin's version of commitment, breaking up is something you schedule, not something that happens to you, with one exception. Martin's story, meanwhile, was about to go back much further than any of the women who came before. The boy before the man. Martin Fitzgerald Lawrence was born on April 16, 1965, in Frankfurt, West Germany, the 4th of 6 children. While his father served overseas in the United States military, his parents named him after 2 men in the headlines at the time: civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. and President John F. Kennedy. For the first few years of his life, the family moved the way military families do, following his father's postings, never quite settling. When Martin was 7, his father left the service, and the family relocated back to the United States, landing in Landover, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. A year later, his parents divorced. Martin was 8 years old. His father, who went on to become a police officer, largely disappeared from his day-to-day life after that. Martin has said in later interviews that he rarely saw him growing up. What he did have was his mother, Clora, who took on the job of raising 6 children almost entirely alone. Martin later said that the miracle was that his mother never gave up. His brother Robert later spoke about those years too, confirming plainly that the family had its rough times, while Clora herself acknowledged that they didn't have material things, but they had love, and that helped a lot. For a stretch, the 6 of them lived in Section 8 housing, while Clora moved between cashier jobs at one department store after another to keep them fed. Boxing became the place Martin found some of the structure that was missing at home. As a teenager, he trained seriously enough to compete in the Mid-Atlantic Golden Gloves, and it was there, inside the gym, that he found something close to a father figure again, this time in the form of his coach. Martin has described the relationship in exactly those terms, crediting boxing not just with keeping him off the streets, but with giving him a version of the guidance his own father was no longer around to provide. That path ended the day he took a hard punch that changed the direction of his life. The injury was enough to make him rethink boxing altogether. And not long after, a teacher who had noticed his sense of humor pushed him to try an open mic night at a local comedy club instead. Martin took the advice. By 1986, he was appearing on the televised talent show Star Search, and within a year he had landed his first recurring television role on What's Happening Now. That early break led to a bigger stage in 1992, when Martin became the host of HBO's Def Comedy Jam, the show that introduced him to a national audience and turned him, almost overnight, into one of the most recognizable comedians in the country. Once the money came in, Martin bought Clora a house in California. He'd later say it felt better than buying his own. Within a few years, the Maklaproquin Sonhom, questions being asked about Martin had stopped being about comedy at all. Everything except a ring. By 2022, Martin was taking on work that pushed him away from the comedy that had built his career. He signed on for Mindcage, a dark crime thriller, and threw himself into the role fully, gaining significant weight and taking additional acting training for a part that had nothing to do with the laughs audiences expected from him. It was around this same period that Martin reportedly began a relationship with Angie Gonzalez, a relationship that, unlike almost everything else in his romantic history, has stayed almost entirely out of the public eye. The following year brought a milestone decades in the making. In April 2023, Martin received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a recognition of a career that by then spanned nearly 4 decades. It should have been an uncomplicated high point. Instead, it landed in the middle of a stretch where rumors about his health had already started circulating online, including a false claim, spreading fast enough to demand a response, that he had died of a heart attack. Not the kind of milestone most people have to publicly deny the same year they get a star on the sidewalk. Those rumors reached a peak in 2024, when Martin appeared at the premiere of Bad Boys: Ride or Die, looking noticeably different than fans remembered. Concern spread quickly across social media, enough that Martin addressed it directly, reassuring the public that he was healthy, that he was in good spirits, and that what people were seeing was simply part of the natural ebb and flow of getting older, not a crisis. The film itself became one of the biggest comebacks of his later career. Bad Boys: Ride or Die went on to gross over $400 million worldwide, proving that nearly 30 years after the original film, audiences still wanted to see Martin back on screen. The following April, on his 60th birthday, Martin sat down with people and described himself as finally enjoying the fruits of his labor, saying he had done it all in his career and his life, and now simply wanted to keep spreading love. Months later, he told Sherry Shepherd on her talk show that he was preparing to head back out on a new stand-up tour. He addressed the rumors again, laughing them off, and said he intended to keep working for years to come. By 2025, he had added an animated voice role in Sneaks and begun work on a personal television project called Nahama. In 2026, that stand-up tour became Y'all Still Know What It Is, and reports placed his net worth at roughly $110 million. Sneaks cast him as the voice of a talking sneaker in an animated feature aimed at family audiences, while Nahama, still in development, drew on his years hosting Def Comedy Jam. Not a bad third act for a man whose entire career only exists because a punch to the face was worse than a joke landing flat. Through all of it, Angie remained a quiet constant. She has appeared beside him at red carpet events and family occasions, including alongside his 3 daughters at the Bad Boys: Ride or Die premiere in May 2024. One of the few times the relationship was seen so publicly. There has been no engagement announcement, wedding, or dramatic public declaration. Only a steady, low-key presence that has lasted longer than either of Martin's marriages did. But there's one relationship even Angie hasn't outlasted, And it isn't a marriage. The one who never left. In 3 decades of interviews, Martin has talked about Patricia's restraining order, about Shamika's 15 unmarried years, about the ring he designed with Roberta down to the engraving. He has answered questions about all 3, on the record, more than once. There's no public record of him saying her name again. That's not proof of anything by itself. Silence in the public record isn't the same as silence in his life. But set against 3 decades of him talking openly about everyone else, it's the closest thing to an answer this story has. Not every relationship in Martin's life has needed a red carpet or a name to prove it was real. In 1995, 2 young actors from opposite coasts were cast together in a buddy cop film nobody expected to become a franchise. Martin Lawrence was already a television star. Will Smith was still mostly known for his sitcom work and had not yet broken into film, the way he would only a few years later. The 2 met on the set of Bad Boys, and almost immediately something clicked that had nothing to do with the script. Martin, notably, had been cast in the film before Will, and it was that connection, that first Bad Boys role, that helped open the door to the film career Will would go on to build. The original Bad Boys, directed by Michael Bay, was itself a modest bet by the studio on a relatively small budget before it went on to gross more than $140 million worldwide, launching both of their film careers at once. Will has since described the bond in his own words too, calling Martin one of the few people in his life he considers a true brother rather than simply a colleague, a description that has stuck through every reunion since. 4 films and 3 decades apart, the 2 did not work together again for 25 years, long enough that most friendships would have quietly expired. Theirs picked up exactly where it left off. Bad Boys 2 came in 2003, but after that, their paths mostly diverged, Martin into his own films and stand-up, Will into an entirely different tier of movie stardom. When they finally reunited for Bad Boys for Life in 2020, there was real uncertainty about whether the chemistry that had defined the original film could survive a quarter-century apart. It did, instantly, and both men have said since that stepping back into those roles felt like no time had passed at all. Martin has credited Will directly with shaping who he became, both as an actor and as a person, recalling how early in their friendship, on the set of that very first Bad Boys, Will bluntly told him that his people skills needed work. That single piece of honesty stuck with him through every film they made together after. Not every close bond in Martin's life has centered on Will, though. In a 2024 interview promoting Bad Boys' Ride or Die, when asked directly who his ride or die was, Martin named his best friend Larry White, alongside his brother figure Sean Lampkin, who had recently passed away. A reminder that Will was not the only person Martin had leaned on over the decades, just the one the cameras had followed the longest. That friendship with Will mattered most during the exact stretch when everything else in Martin's life felt uncertain. During the health concerns that surrounded the release of Bad Boys' Ride or Die, people close to Martin described Will as a steady presence, a brother from another mother who had kept Martin under his wing for years, someone Martin could call about anything and sort things through with. When Martin turned 58 during production on the film, Will marked the day with a birthday tribute on Instagram, a video stitched together from 30 years of moments between them. The 2 later stood together at the film's Dubai premiere in May 2024, 30 years and 4 films after the story began, still showing up for one another, decade after decade. If the loudest thing Martin Lawrence has ever said about Lark Voorhees is nothing at all, is that its own kind of admission? And if the one relationship in his life that's never needed a ring, a headline, or her name is a friendship rather than a marriage, does that say something about him or something about what commitment actually requires? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.